Good morning, YouTube, and happy Friday. I hope you had a wonderful week with your students. This week, I am in early to start prepping a lab that I'm doing with my AP kids, and it really occurred to me that one of the things I haven't talked about on my channel is how I use labs in my instruction. That is one of the questions I get a lot from teachers, especially like from the teacher prep room, like, how do I use them? Do I use them as reinforcement? Do I use them as like a way to introduce new content and skills? And honestly, it's a mix of both. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do and some ways that you can incorporate labs into your instruction where maybe you're using them in a new way as opposed to just as reinforcement activities. So I'm going to set up for my day. I have some copies to make. I did give a test in AP, so you'll see there's some notebooks in there. So I need to finish grading those notebooks, but I will be back a little bit later to tell you all about how I incorporate labs into my instruction and hopefully give you some inspiration for some things that you can do with your classes. Well, it's the end of the day. It's actually very late. It's like 4 o'clock right now. I usually don't stay this late on Fridays, but I'm feeling pretty good today. I had Wednesday off this week because of the Jewish holiday, so I'm feeling a little bit more refreshed. And so I thought to myself, you know what, I'm gonna stay late tonight and obviously record a video, but also plan for next week so I'm not bogged down all Sunday, spending all my time trying to plan for the week. So I thought I'd kind of just stay and get some stuff done and of course, catch up with you guys. So it was a wonderful day. I had a great day with kids. It was a very active day, very busy day. I would say the honors kids were really busy. They did a team activity, a POGL activity that I wrote on light as a particle, light as a wave, introducing like the mathematics involved in light calculations. We're not done with it yet though, so we'll have to finish that on Monday. As far as my AP students, I had a double lab period with one of the classes, and so that was a little crazy because I did FRQ speed dating, which was a lot of fun. I usually do that towards the end of the year, like when I'm reviewing for the exam. But you know, I said, I want to mix it up. Like, I'm just tired of like handing them worksheets and stuff. So I'm like, let me mix it up. Let's do some FRQ speed dating. And it was a lot of fun. They did a great job. I was really happy with what they did. And, you know, I felt like it was important to do that because I gave them an FRQ last week that they didn't do really well on. And so I went over that FRQ with them. And then I wanted to give them another one to practice with because, you know, practice makes perfect, especially when we go over it. And I'm happy to say that they did not repeat the same mistakes that they made, at least from what I saw. So that was pretty good. But the second period, and I did this with all my AP classes, the second period, I did a bell jar lab with my students. So I like this particular activity a lot because it helps the students to think about gases, in particular gas pressure, and how it affects so many different things that we see in our lives. And I thought this was just like a fun way to kick off our unit on gases. You may say, wow, you're already in intermolecular forces. I do not follow the course exam and description. I follow Zumdahl's progression. So we are in chapter 5 right now. And I just wanted to give the students a chance to kind of experiment a little bit. We actually don't cover gases in our honors first year class. And so I definitely thought that doing this bell jar lab was important for the students so they can have some experience and just have some context for what we're learning about. I think with learning about gases and gas properties, students get so bogged down with the math, they don't even bother to think about like what's actually happening on the particle level. So this was kind of my chance to spend some time on that and have the students practice drawing some models. So they did do some particle models, and we'll probably finish that up on Monday. And the whole reason why I wanted to do this video is because I was thinking to myself, wow, like I am such a different teacher than I was when I first started teaching, in that I used to believe that labs were used purely for reinforcement. And you know, I could see where that comes from because when you're new, you're like, what else do you do? And so, you know, labs, I will say, can be great for reinforcement of the content. But for me, now that I'm more experienced and feeling a little bit more inspired in the current school district that I'm in, I definitely use labs more as an introductory type of activity. So I thought I could talk a little bit about the different ways that I use labs in my instruction, and then you can kind of think about the ways that maybe you can adapt them for your needs as well. I've already talked about using labs as reinforcement for content, and I do think that there is value in doing some labs for that. But I think if you're going to do a lab for reinforcement, why not have your students write the procedure? So I would say this is more of a DIY lab. So this is an example of a lab that I do with my students now, and it is different than the lab that I used to do before. I used to have the procedure all written out for them. So my students in the unit on atomic structure, we were calculating the atomic mass of candium. So basically it's just like a sample bag of candy. I just like use handfuls of candy corn, Red Hots, and pumpkins. You want to get candy of different masses. And basically the students have to create a procedure to calculate the atomic mass of the element candium. So they have a space to write their procedure. They have a space to indicate what data they need to collect. And I do emphasize the importance of a table, something to organize their data. And then they have a space for calculations. And so this gives them an opportunity to plan out their procedure, their data, and then show all work for their calculations in this space. And then on the back, they have a chance to answer some post-lab questions. So with the post-lab questions, it really takes a deeper look into why the atomic mass is not equal to any of the mass of the pieces, which I think is a really good question for the students to think about. It has them think about how they decided to compute and obtain the mass of each candium isotope. And then finally, down here, what I really love is that the students spend time drawing an explanatory model to illustrate their sample of candium in the baggie. And so I think that the candium lab, while it is more reinforcement, it does help them really think about what data do they need to collect and encourages them to write their procedure. So it's not such like a cookbook lab. Instead, it kind of is a little bit of an extension to what we've been doing in class. And I thought the students were very successful. I actually did this with my honor students last week. They were pretty successful with it. And I think that overall, they knew exactly what to do. What was a little bit of a struggle was drawing the model, which I always suspect it will be, but as we do more modeling throughout the school year, it'll get easier and easier. The second way that I love to incorporate labs into my instruction is by incorporating some phenomena. And I know I already talked a little bit about this with the bell jar lab, but this was an example of the bell jar lab that I did with my AP kids today. So in these boxes, the students had to draw explanatory models. This first part is just the students becoming familiar with the bell jar apparatus. And then I would say more towards the bottom, this is where they start to get into removing atmospheric pressure from like balloons, for example. There's also a suction cup that they end up doing it for. We start to relate mathematically like what's happening, but you know, I don't go right to that because like I said, I don't want them to get too bogged down with it, but we introduce this idea of a proportionality constant. And then this is always fun, boiling water at room temperature. Like this, the kids just absolutely love it. And I mean, they're like amazed. And then they're amazed that when they take the temperature after the temperature went down. So that really sets us up for some really amazing conversations of content. It's one of those discrepant events, you know, that the students can use to ask questions and think about. And then at the end, they spend some time circling the different relationships between the different variables. So that is one way that you can incorporate some different phenomena. For me, I also did this with my golden penny lab experiment, and I know I talked about that in the last video, but basically I was able to talk a little bit about alloy chemistry and have the students focus on modeling and writing claim evidence reasoning. So you really want to think about in your labs, like, why are you doing this lab? Like, do you want to introduce a discrepant event? Do you want to introduce a phenomenon of some kind? Do you want to do some reinforcement? Like, those are all questions in your mind about like, what's the purpose of this lab? You don't want to just do something for the sake of doing it. You definitely want to have a purpose when you're going into it. Another way that I incorporate labs into my instruction is by using it to introduce new content. I mean, honestly, I don't have to stand up and teach every single thing. They can learn the content by engaging in a lab experiment. And so this is one of my favorite labs. This is something that I use to teach intermolecular forces and really the link between intermolecular forces and macroscopic properties. And so for this particular lab, one of the ways that you can provide scaffolding for your students if you want to introduce new content is by putting something like in like a little box there. So it gives them some information that they have to read, and then they take that information and they have to apply it to what they see below. So this allows the students to have proper scaffolding so that they kind of have some idea of what they should be writing. And it helps you to kind of decide like, okay, do they need a little bit more help with this concept? You can overhear their discussions. But this is one of my favorite ways to incorporate lab into my weekly instruction because, like I said, it's something that they're actually doing. It's something that they're observing. And then if it's applicable to their lives, I mean, that makes all the difference. And then, of course, with these activities, besides, proposing explanations, I do try to have some follow-up questions, about their observations, trying to link the particulate-like nature of matter to what we're observing on the macroscopic scale. So this Intermolecular Forces Lab is a great one for kids, especially if you're just starting your unit on intermolecular forces. They don't necessarily need to know what hydrogen bonding is or dipole-dipole interaction. They really can just spend some time looking at some different phenomena and trying to make sense of it themselves. The final way that I love to incorporate labs into my instruction is through the use of teaching a technique. So for example, flame test is a very common lab that we all do in our chemistry classes, and it's a lot of fun. The kids really enjoy it. I know I enjoy seeing how excited they are. And so with the flame test, it's a technique that you're teaching about. In the background section, it just talks about, what's happening on the particulate level in order to create light. But then as you go on in the procedure, it talks about, how to perform the flame test using the nichrome wire. I know there's a lot of variations. You can use splints, you can use the salts. Everybody is so different with how they choose to do it. For me, I just do the nichrome wire procedure because that's what my colleague likes to do. So I just kind of follow suit. But this is a lab where the students can practice their CER writing skills. So I use it to teach the technique of the flame test, but also I love to use it to talk about CERs and again, bring back that concept of writing a CER and defending a claim. And I ultimately have students write their claims and evidence and reasoning on a whiteboard, and we talk about, what you should include whenever you're writing a claim, evidence, reasoning statement. So it's pretty effective, and like I said, it just helps the students to review that skill because I know if they don't use it, then they lose it. And so I want them to spend some time practicing that skill because that's something we're going to be using all year together. I've given you a total of 4 ways to incorporate labs into your daily instruction without the use of reinforcement. So I hope you are able to glean some inspiration for your classes, but the key is start small. Nobody says you have to go right to, stopping reinforcement and going to, starting your unit with the lab. You can start small. Maybe you go through the unit a little bit and have them write a procedure for something. These things take time. So be gentle with yourself. Know that you're doing the best that you can for your students, and your students are incredibly lucky to have you. With that said, I'm going to get out of here. I hope you had a wonderful week with your students. And as always, I will check in with you guys next week.